Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, April 22nd. Today is Canadians' last chance to vote early in person before federal election day on Monday. Special ballot voting is available at any Elections Canada office until 6 p.m. local time. Today is also the final day for voters to apply to vote by mail. Yesterday wrapped up 4 days of voting at advanced polling stations in ridings across the country as we enter the final week of the 5-week campaign. A record number of voters turned out to cast their ballots early, with 7.3 million people voting between Friday and Monday. The Conservative platform that was released today includes relatively few surprises in terms of policies. Mr. Poilievre will spend big on cutting income taxes, scrapping the capital gains inclusion rate tax hike, and removing the GST on new homes. Like in Mr. Carney's budget, another major budget line item is an increase in military spending, with the Conservatives projecting spending $17 billion more on armed forces over the next 4 years.
Our platform at forachange.ca lays out this plan. It is a plan that will lower taxes and debt by getting rid of bureaucracy, consulting fees, waste, and excessive foreign aid to dictators, terrorists, and global bureaucracy. It is a plan to build homes by removing taxes and bureaucracy. It is a plan for safe streets by locking up criminals for a change. Change to unleash our resources so that we can stand on our own 2 feet and stand up to Trump and anyone else from a position of strength. The choice is this: a 4th Liberal term with Mark Carney, whose reckless Liberal plan will add even more debt than Trudeau, or a new Conservative government with a responsible plan to save $125 billion and put us back on the path to growth and security. This is my plan for change. First, we will cut the Liberal deficit by 70% by cutting back on bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid to dictators, terrorists, and global bureaucracies, slashing money for special interests, and unleashing $500 billion of extra economic growth by unlocking the power of our resources and home building. We will, thank you. Now, in the past, I've told you that there would be a dollar-for-dollar law. Every dollar of new spending would need to be matched with a dollar of savings. We've gone even further. Every dollar of new spending in our platform, especially for things like defense, will be met with $1.50 in savings in other areas. We will cut consulting fees that the government pays by $10 billion annually and almost $20 billion over the term. Gradually and through attrition, without mass layoffs, we will wind down the cost of the bureaucracy by hiring back only 2 people for every 3 who voluntarily retire. We'll cut back on foreign aid by roughly a third, so that we no longer give money to terrorists, dictators, and global bureaucracy. The money will go to frontline people in need. We will And we will also pass this spending discipline in law so that going forward, every time a politician or bureaucrat comes up with an idea to spend more money, they will need to find the exact amount or more in savings before the idea will even be considered. This is how single moms, small businesses, and seniors make their decisions. Whenever I spend money, I will think of it as my mother's money, a retired teacher. If she would not be happy with it coming out of her retirement funds, then I should not be happy spending it. Canadians have been pinching their pennies long enough. It's time for government to start pinching pennies as well.
And last night, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was on the campaign trail in Port Moody, BC, where Mr. Singh accused Mark Carney of creating tax breaks for millionaires.
And Mark Carney, the Liberals, they're standing by while CEOs get richer. No crackdowns on profiteering, no help for families at the till. Instead, what he's promising in his bill, in his budget, in his electoral platform, is $28 billion in cuts and tax breaks for people making over $1.4 million a year. They say we can't afford to invest in you. But we know the truth. The money is there. It's just going to the wrong people. And if you've been through hard times, you know exactly what happens next. Because when the pressure hits, it's never the CEOs who feel it. They'll do anything to protect their bottom line. It's working people who pay their price. It's families who get the pink slip, who delay the dentist, who skip the groceries, who walk away from the pharmacy empty-handed, while the rich never feel a pinch. And all the while, the things that define us as Canadians, our healthcare, our public services, our belief in looking out for one another, are being chipped away.
The Liberals are calling a Conservative claim desperate and completely false. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre told a Canadian Association of Retired Persons event the Liberals will tax Canadians' home equity, but did not offer evidence.
What happens when the finance officials tap them on the shoulder and says, you're out of money, you need to go find more? Well, they're going to go out and they're going to tax your home equity. They're going to go after your house, and they'll lie and deny, and they'll never admit it before an election. Of course not. But when have they ever, the tax increases Liberals have brought in, when have they ever admitted it before the election happens? They do it after they no longer need your vote, but still need your money. Bottom line is, Liberals will tax your home equity if you give them the chance in this election. We will never let that happen. Your home belongs to you, and when you sell, you should keep every single penny for yourself and your kids.
Former Conservative leaders Erin O'Toole and Andrew Scheer also claimed in the previous two federal elections that Canadians' home equity would be vulnerable under the Liberals. A capital gains tax on home sales is not part of the Liberal platform, and a statement from the Liberal campaign flatly rejected the idea. When asked about wanting more powers for Quebec regarding immigration at a news conference, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet said that Quebec should be given all powers in order to support either current or higher levels of immigration in the province.
Put simply, I want all powers for Quebec. When you are a different nation with a different language, a different culture, a different history, different values, a nation that wants to keep the value of secularity of the state, you need some tools to achieve your own survival as a nation and your own thriving as a nation. Among those tools, there's the control over one nation immigration. So it's all the powers that should be given to Quebec if we want to be able to support present levels of immigration or even higher levels of immigration. But before we get there, we have the responsibility to know precisely what we have achieved, where we have failed. We need some tools to measure the success of what we do. Intuitively, we believe that we have failed in terms of teaching French to people who come to live in Quebec, or receiving them properly in terms of having a good job and a good salary for their families, or convincing them to go to the regions of Quebec. So we need time. And during that time, the creation of those tools to measure the success or failure, Ottawa should reduce the length of the time before they treat the situation of each of those people who ask to be welcome in Canada or in Quebec. When one waits 4 years, it is a shame. It is a shame for a government who pretends to be so efficient after Phoenix and that and whatever else. They believe they're so efficient that they want to introduce themselves into jurisdictions of Quebec and provinces. In terms of management, the government of Canada is mostly a failure. They should keep their nose into their own business and let Quebec do what's good for Quebec.
Elections Canada says it has removed one of its employees from working at polling stations while it investigates allegations that the person was attempting to influence voters at a polling station in the Greater Toronto Area. A spokesperson for King Vaughan Liberal candidate Mubarak Ahmed said multiple people reached out to their office, saying that a woman wearing an Elections Canada badge was approaching people lined up to vote at a polling station in Vaughan and encouraged them to vote Conservative. And jury selection began today in southwestern Ontario in the sexual assault trial of 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team. Dylan Dubé, Carter Hart, Michael McLeod, Cal Foote, and Alex Formanton were charged with sexual assault early last year in an allegation incident against a woman at a London hotel in June 2018, when the team was at an event celebrating their gold medal win. McLeod is facing an additional charge of being a party to the offense of sexual assault. All 5 players have pleaded not guilty. All right, stay tuned. Coming up after the break, we'll be speaking to Hadessa Allen-Carr from Canadian Affairs about the underperformance of the Bloc Québécois in the election. After that, we'll have the CEO of Aspen Leaf Energy Limited to discuss the recent wave of executives coming out to support Pierre Poilievre. Stay with us. We'll have that story and more news right after the break. One of the major themes so far in this election has been the underperformance of the Bloc Québécois. Hadessa Allen-Carr from Canadian Affairs joined us to discuss their drop in the polls and what impact this will have on Election Day.
Well, the short answer is US President Donald Trump. The tariffs that he's imposed on Canada and the threats to make Canada the 51st state have really knocked down other things that Quebecers were preoccupied with and have made Canadians a lot more patriotic. Notably, it has made Quebecers a lot more patriotic as well. And an Angus Reid poll from February, it showed that Quebecers had the most gains among all the provinces in attachment to Canada. And this has really been a problem for the Bloc Québécois because this patriotism that has risen in Quebec has really knocked that separatist movement, that nationalist movement that we've seen been so important in previous elections down the priority list for the province. And even though the Bloc Québécois last year they won a really important riding, a Liberal stronghold in a by-election in Montreal, they might not see those gains in this next federal election.
We also asked where former Bloc voters are going in response to that uptick in patriotism.
Well, like most of the country, Quebec is really supporting right now the Liberal Party, at least in the aggregate polls. So the Liberals are about 20 points ahead of any party in second place with about 42%. I think I checked this morning. But what's interesting is the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives are really toe to toe. They're really fighting for voters and getting about, I think, 25, 24% of that in the polls. And the Conservatives seem to be gaining support compared to 2021, where the party came well behind the Bloc Québécois and seats gained in the federal election. So the Bloc is really trying to maintain ground here in this next election.
Executives from some of Canada's biggest companies across various sectors have come out and endorsed Pierre Poilievre, calling for a change in government. In a full-page ad taken out in Canada's largest newspapers, these executives have thrown their support behind the Conservatives, claiming that Poilievre is the only leader with a plan to get Canada back on track. Joining us now is one of the CEOs who signed the letter, Brian Gould, CEO and founder of Aspen Leaf Energy Limited. Brian, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the executives on this list include CEOs from sectors across Canada's economy. How exactly did this ad campaign come about, and what made you feel the need to take out ads endorsing the Conservatives?
I guess there's lots of backroom conversations about the state of the Canadian economy, and this goes back even before the election. And I know that there's a growing sense of frustration that we've been on the wrong path, a lack of fiscal discipline, building up enormous debt, hamstringing the industry with overregulation, and frankly, governments trying to centrally plan the economy rather than letting a free market economy work to be productive for all Canadians. So there's been gathering frustration on this for some time, and myself and other CEOs, we have conversations on this, and realize, first you think you're the only one thinking these things, and of course you start to have these conversations and you realize you're not the only one. And that was, I would say, the genesis of an agreement to write a letter coming out publicly to state our view.
Now, the first major call to action is support for free enterprising, arguing that the government needs to be a facilitator. Can you walk us through what exactly this means and where the current government under the Liberals has gone wrong?
So my view is we're at a crossroads in Canada, and fundamentally, I think myself and the people that I won't speak for others that signed the letter, but I'm sure we have a common view that the economy works from the bottom up. So it starts with each individual, and some of your listeners will be familiar with the famous Adam Smith and the invisible hand in the economy. And that, frankly, is what Pierre Poilievre and his party stand for. The Liberal Party and their track record is one based on top-down central planning and the government telling businesses what to do. And frankly, when I read Mark Carney's platform, it's not just telling businesses what to do, but it's increasingly the government doing business itself. And I think history just shows that that's incredibly inefficient and leads to a poor use of the country's resources.
And your ad also mentions barriers. What specific barriers are you looking to have removed or eased?
There are a plethora of regulatory barriers, and I'm from the oil and gas industry, but this is relevant not just for our industry. Frankly, in our country now, you can't get anything built. Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, which applies to all industries, not just to oil and gas. It's been ruled unconstitutional, and it's just impossible to get anything built, whether it's an energy project or a mine. And it scares away investors. This country has a huge productivity problem. We don't attract enough capital, and we invest in low productivity activities that diminish our economy. And regulatory tangles contribute very strongly to that. So we do need to streamline our regulatory processes.
And in terms of fiscal discipline, what exactly does that entail? Is there a target in terms of government spending?
I mean, for me, fiscal discipline starts with governments staying in their lane and doing the things that governments are intended to do and not getting the lane of business. So business is here to do business, and government's job is to create an environment where business can thrive, but not to do business itself. So it starts with that. And you look at the buildup of the bureaucracy. Most of our employment gains have come through hiring government workers. And it's incredibly bloated. And so fiscal discipline, in my mind, means running a lean government that does the things that government needs to do, the essentials, and lets business do business.
And today, in his platform announcement, Poilievre didn't mention anything about how he's going to handle the tariff situation or the Trump situation. Now, as a business CEO, and as you mentioned in the oil and gas industry, does that worry you at all?
Actually, perversely, I have much more confidence in Pierre Poilievre and his government dealing with the tariffs than I do Mark Carney. People, frankly, believe Mark Carney is this great businessman. Mark Carney has not run businesses. Mark Carney has been a bureaucrat. He's been in government. He's a policy guy. And frankly, when I look at Mark Carney's fundamental beliefs, it's about big government. And perversely, one of the things that Mark Carney champions is putting on border adjustment taxes to tax emissions from countries that don't have industrial carbon taxes. That, in my mind, is a tax, no different than a tariff. So not only do I not believe that Mark Carney is the best person to deal with the U.S. administration, I think he will pile on and put taxes on Canadians in addition to the tariffs that we're already facing. So fundamentally, I believe that Pierre will pull together, frankly, an all-star team of negotiators. I know some of the names that would be contemplated that I think would volunteer gratefully to help the country. And I'm absolutely convinced that Pierre would have a much stronger negotiating team than would Mr. Carney.
Well, to stay on taxes, they're a major focal point. What should be reformed when it comes to the tax code?
Well, quite simply, we need a tax system that reduces taxes, that incents investment. This country has an enormous productivity problem. We do not attract the capital investments that are required to build our economy, and we have this incredible blessing of wealth in our natural resources, but that will require large capital investments for us to realize our potential. And having a competitive tax environment is a key component. Now, I know some people say, oh, that gives tax breaks to the rich. Nothing could be further from the truth. A reduced tax take from the government will incent investment, and that will get the economy going, create great jobs for everyone, create employment, and create prosperity that would be shared for all Canadians. So I'm a huge advocate of reducing taxes, not for my own personal well-being, but to incent investment, which the country so direly needs.
And on energy, both the Liberals and Conservatives have, in their own way, endorsed the idea of energy expansion. How do you see the two plans comparing to each other?
They're night and day different. So the Conservatives would facilitate growth in oil and gas production. Mr. Carney is championing an emissions cap, which will effectively be a cap on production. He talks about taxing what he calls large emitters, which will simply make energy not only make energy more expensive for Canadians, and that means everything more expensive for Canadians, but he will stifle the investment that's required for us to reach our potential to export to the world. And in terms of climate, if for those that are interested, Canada's best contribution would be to grow our LNG business and export LNG to the world to displace coal. Mr. Carney's approach will strangle energy, and he has dedicated, frankly, his life over the last number of decades, both through championing regulations, as we've discussed, but attempting to starve the industry of the capital that it needs for investment. And frankly, then he seeks to vilify the very use of oil and gas, which is incredibly destructive for Canada and its economy.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, stay with us. We'll have more of today's top national and international headlines right after the break. Over the weekend, the Federal Liberal Party unveiled its much-anticipated election platform, marking a pivotal moment in the final stretch of the 2025 campaign.
Part of standing up is to have the plan to manage through the chaos to a better future for all Canadians. Now, I've managed crises virtually my entire career. I helped Canada navigate through the 2008 global financial crisis. I guided the UK through the turmoil of Brexit. I know what it takes to not merely survive a crisis, but to emerge stronger than before. I know what it means to be entrusted with making the decisions that will affect the lives and livelihoods of millions of people. I know how to manage the chaos created by President Trump. I know how we in Canada can win this trade war, how we can build the strongest economy in the G7. And that starts with knowing that when you are in a crisis, you have to prepare for the worst. You can't hope for the best. Government needs to step up. Government must lead and catalyze private investment. I know from traveling across our great country that Canadians are ready to step up. Canadians don't just want to resist the U.S. Canadians are determined to win. And so our task as a nation, thank you, I'm here. Our task as a nation over the coming weeks, months, and years is to think big and to act bigger. Because we're not helpless in this. We're not just passive observers of a rapidly changing world, and we certainly aren't the United States. We're Canada. We are free, sovereign, ambitious.
With national security, economic resilience, and international diplomacy front and center, the Liberals are making a calculated push to solidify their lead and differentiate themselves from a rising Conservative opposition. To unpack the strategy behind the platform and what signals for the days ahead, we're now joined by Liberal strategist Andrew Perez. Andrew, as always, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here with you.
Now, what are the big ticket items Canadians should know about the Carney platform?
This is a visionary plan, Teresa, that is really a combination of catalyzing major private sector investment in the economy with continuing a healthy pace of social spending. $130 billion over the coming 4 years. These monies are going to flow to building better healthcare infrastructure, $18 billion earmarked for the Canadian military so that Canada can exceed its 2% of GDP commitment to NATO. And also a great deal of money is allocated for housing. A Carney government would double the pace of residential construction across this country to create more affordable and deeply affordable housing for the under 40 demographic. And so it's a platform tailored for the moment we're in. It's a platform that's Trump-proof. And that is ready to confront what is a real crisis to both our sovereignty and our economic prosperity. And it stands in contrast to largely a slash and burn platform that is Doge-like, US-style Doge-like cuts to the public service that the Conservatives released earlier today.
And on Carney's platform and budget, we're looking at consecutive deficits year over year with spending beyond what Trudeau spent. Now, many thought initially that Carney would be different than Trudeau in that respect, but now argue that Carney is more of the same. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, to be clear, the Conservatives aren't promising a balanced budget, and their accounting is very questionable. They haven't accounted for, they want to cut taxes by $75 billion. And economists have already taken to X, formerly Twitter, today to question the accounting in the Conservative platform. As for the Liberal platform, Carney's going to do something that's never been done before. He's going to divide the fiscal framework into an operating budget and a capital budget. The operating budget will go to services, and the capital budget will be investments in machinery, equipment, infrastructure, things that will spur the Canadian economy. And Carney is promising to balance the operating budget rather within 4 years. But I want to add one key point, Teresa. The Liberal platform does not put together rosy economic predictions like the Conservative platform. It assumes a worst case scenario in terms of the economic growth that we're going to have for the next 4 years, whereas the Conservative platform seems to assume a best case scenario. And so I think it's actually a much more prudent plan. In spite of the spending that I think is necessary, it's a prudent plan because it assumes worst case scenario in terms of economic growth. And in fact, if the Liberal plan is fully executed over the coming 4 years, I do think that we will exceed expectations in terms of economic growth and actually balance the budget at an earlier date.
Well, I do want to stay on the spending because how can Carney claim that the Trudeau government spent too much while promising to spend more?
Well, I think it's not just about spending. We are talking about spending strategically, catalyzing private sector investment, expediting east-west pipelines, large-scale infrastructure projects, natural resource projects that are going to create thousands and thousands of Canadian jobs. Carney has also promised to do something that we haven't seen since the Paul Martin government nearly 20 years ago, a line-by-line expenditure review. So going through the budget, the federal budget line item by line item to identify efficiencies. And I think, Teresa, this process will yield efficiencies and less spending when it comes to the size of the public service, which we know grew by 40% under the Trudeau era. So yes, there's spending, but I think in a time of crisis, we need to spend strategically on infrastructure. And I just say finally, there are a lot of services that the Trudeau government and national programs brought on that Canadians are reliant upon. Dental care, which 8 million Canadians rely on, especially low-income seniors, national pharmacare, the Canada Child Benefit. The Conservative Party would cut all three of those programs, leaving vulnerable Canadians at risk.
And on the division of an operating budget and a capital budget, critics have argued that regardless of how that is split on the balance sheet, it's taxpayers who are going to end up taking the hit and will have to pay that. Debt is debt, is it not?
I mean, debt is a reality in every government, and governments incur debt. And what's important is that there's a plan with realistic forecasts to pay down that debt and to eventually balance the budget. And that's precisely what Carney has laid out. And again, it's all about economic growth. We cannot cut services that Canadians rely upon at this very precarious time.
Now, Carney has laid out balancing the budget. But he's not planning to balance the budget until year 5, which would mean almost 15 years of deficits. Would it not be prudent to get there quicker?
The Conservatives aren't planning to balance the budget within 4 years. The Conservatives are actually planning to spend just as much money or more money. They haven't accounted for how they're going to pay for a $75 billion worth of tax cuts. The Conservatives are promising to spend just as much money to revamp the Canadian military, and they're really relying on slashing and burning the size of the public service, CBC Radio-Canada, and foreign aid. I don't think that's a very prudent approach at this time in our history to slash CBC Radio-Canada, which is part of the Canadian identity. We need to improve CBC Radio-Canada, but we don't need to slash it. And by the way, Carney, while he's not going to cut the size of the public service, he has committed to capping the size of the public service.
And on revenue from counter tariffs, Canadians, generally speaking, pay the cost of the tariffs when they buy U.S. goods. Is that not just a tax increase on Canadians?
No, I think, look, we have to respond with a dollar for dollar retaliatory approach. The Conservatives have said as much. And in fact, in the Conservatives' fiscal plan, which I have poked holes in, they are actually relying on those monies from the counter tariffs to fund a lot of their spending. And so I think there's a cross-partisan consensus that a retaliatory approach is necessary and that those monies will be used within the fiscal framework in the coming 4 years. I'd just like to add, finally, the Liberal Party did release its platform last weekend, 67 pages, very concrete. The Conservatives released a mere 30-page platform earlier today with half of the platform is photos of the leader and his wife. It's very much a marketing document. There's not a lot of specifics. It's not a plan that is Trump-proof, that meets the moment we're in. And that's really the approach of the Liberal Party, to put forward a platform and a plan that will confront the threat that Donald Trump poses and grow our economy to make our economy the fastest growing economy in the G7.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much, Teresa.
All right, stay with us. Coming up, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. The day for Pope Francis's funeral has been set. U.S. President Trump comes out to support Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth following reports that he shared details of a March attack on Houthi rebels. We'll have those stories and more news right after the break. Cardinals have taken their first decisions following the death of Pope Francis. They have set Saturday as the date for his funeral and are allowing ordinary faithful to begin paying their final respects starting Wednesday, when his casket is brought into St. Peter's Basilica. The Cardinals met for the first time today in Vatican Hall to chart the next step before a conclave begins to choose Francis's successor. The Cardinals set the funeral for Saturday at 10 a.m. in St. Peter's Square to be celebrated by the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. Pope Francis, the first pontiff from Latin America, died on Monday at the age of 88. A new internal government report is painting a very dark picture for the future of Canada in 2040. Titled Future Lives, Social Mobility in Question, the report paints a picture of what life in Canada could soon be like if current economic policy stays the course. While speaking in Vaughan, Pierre Poilievre spoke on the report and how dangerous the future could be if the Liberals get re-elected.
And it is a very dangerous future if the Liberals get their fourth term. And this isn't just my words. It's Mark Carney's own government department. Just a week ago, we learned that one of the departments of the government, the Privy Council office, has made some very depressing predictions about the way the country is headed after a decade of Liberal rule. I'm going to quote directly from this Privy Council report. In 2040, upward mobility is almost unheard of in Canada, they predict. Hardly anyone believes they can build a better life for themselves or their children through their own efforts, and many worry about sliding down the social order. It forecasts more people may struggle to afford rent, bills, and groceries. The resulting stress could worsen mental health challenges. This would increase demand for social services. And then there's some specific forecasts that the current Liberal government is making about our future. In 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many. Inequality between those who rent and those who own has become a key driver of social, economic, and political conflict. The report goes on to say that people may lose faith in the Canadian project altogether. It forecasts that many will leave the country to avoid this rising cost and declining opportunity. And they believe that it will lead to a mental health crisis. More people will emigrate to jurisdictions where they believe upward mobility and or higher standards of living are easier to obtain. Quote, if young workers leave Canada, it may become harder to pay for the systems that support a growing number of older people. It says things are so bad that, and this is a quote, I'm quoting from the government here, if I had said this myself, you would have thought it was outlandish, but this is the government's own predictions about how bad things are headed right now.
The Toronto Sun's Brian Passafoom has more on the report.
So this report was produced by an organization called Policy Horizons Canada, and that's a government sort of a think tank, I guess. It's overseen by the Privy Council office. So this is kind of people who work within the government who analyze current public policy and sort of branch off of that, sort of like make predictions based on current policy. So this report is entitled Future Lives, Social Mobility in Question, and it paints a pretty bleak picture of Canada's future. It predicts by 2040 we're looking at a almost like an aristocracy of old, where everything's ruled by land barons and people are pretty much at the behest of people who own land and who are kind of the elite in society, and that upward mobility in society is impossible. The kind of the sort of the dystopian societies you read about in history books that thought were long behind us. And this is what this government report predicts for Canada. It sort of paints a picture of what kind of we're seeing now. We're looking at affordability becoming possible. Post-secondary schooling becomes impossible to achieve unless you're rich enough to afford the tuition and the housing costs. Pretty much making post-secondary education kind of a sort of a secondary in life. Society realizes they can survive without a degree, and universities only exist to help the elites cement their place in society, which sounds hauntingly like society was like the not too distant past. Housing will, as it is now, owning a home is less attainable than ever. They predict by 2040, housing and land ownership will only be passed within families. Owning a home will be impossible unless you have some sort of intergenerational wealth, things like that. And yeah, it's predicting a pretty bleak future where people of social classes don't mix, and trust in government and business and capitalism and everything else kind of just collapses. And people sort of revert to kind of almost like a serfdom, living off the land. People, Canadian families poaching wildlife for food, things like that. I think it's interesting. The reaction I'm seeing from this report is from people saying, well, this is kind of the reality we're already living. It's not a big stretch to look at sort of where we are now with where current government policy has brought us to, and it's not a short stretch to imagine society, declining more. And kind of the ironic thing is that, this is a public policy think tank run completely within, the Privy Council office. So really, this is a government organization painting a bleak picture based on the past decade of government policy. So really, it's almost like a warning that, if you keep the status quo, things are just going to get worse. That there's really no other way to interpret that.
In an interview with Fox News, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that the president stands strongly behind Mr. Hegseth after reports that he shared details of a March attack on Yemen's Houthis in a message group that included his wife, brother, and personal lawyer.
The president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth, who is doing a phenomenal job leading the Pentagon. And this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement. Secretary Hegseth was nominated for this position because he is standing up for the war fighter, the men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line to protect our country and our homeland. And unfortunately, there have been people at that building who don't like the change the secretary is trying to bring, so they are leaking and they are lying to the mainstream media. We've seen this game played before. The secretary is doing a tremendous job, and the president stands strongly behind him.
The revelations that Mr. Hegseth used the unclassified messaging system Signal to share highly sensitive security details for the second time comes at an uncertain moment for him and the Pentagon, where senior officials were ousted last week as part of an internal investigation. Secretary Hegseth accused what he called a disgruntled former employee for the leak.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. And on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter. So I'm happy to be here at the Easter egg roll with my dad and my kids, because, you know, this is what we're doing it for. These kids right here. This is why we're fighting the fake news media. This is why we're fighting slash and burn Democrats. This is why we're fighting hoaxsters. Hoaxsters. This group, no, this group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with axes to grind, and then you put it all together as if it's some news story. And when we know it, we know exactly what it is. So I'm really proud of what we're doing for the president, fighting hard across the board, and I'm going to go roll some Easter eggs with my kids. Thank you very much.
Switching gears to the NHL playoffs, Alexander Ovechkin added another accomplishment to his career, just over 2 weeks after breaking Wayne Gretzky's record for the most goals in NHL history.
Well, there are a few things that Ovechkin hasn't done, not many, but he's never scored an overtime game-winning goal in the playoffs.
Really interesting here. He's on the shooting spot on the left wing. The Canadiens have Demidov and Laine on the ice, a rookie and a player not known for his defensive play.
The puck is free, and a great chance for Beauvillier. Ovechkin scores! Now he has that playoff overtime.
Ovechkin scored his first overtime goal in the Stanley Cup playoffs to give the Washington Capitals a victory over the Montreal Canadiens in Game 1 of their first-round series on Monday night. He won his first 44 playoff games over 15 previous appearances without doing that. Ovechkin scored twice to end his personal postseason drought and had a team-leading 7 hits. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the Newsforum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. We'll see you next time. Good night, Canada.